Welcome back, everyone, to the Human Role. So I have another great guest today. So Maurio, he is heavy in HR tech space, experience, expertise of Oracle, all things Oracle. He's a VP of Solutions at Argano. So really happy to have Chris here today. We're going to get into early career development now that AI has kind of taken over, I guess you can say, the world, but really kind of like what it looks like if we get to a point of having everything automated, right? I know that's a concern for lots of my network, and I hear that at all types of events. So Chris is going to kind of help us kind of explore that and get us with some good like tidbits on what we can use for our future strategy. So Chris, before we get into it, thank you again for joining today, but I'd love for you to just give your background on your experience, but also how you got into your stuff today.
I've been in the HR space probably about 20 years at this point, and I'm part of our solutions team within the Oracle business unit. And essentially what that means is I work with our sales and our delivery teams either to help new customers adopt Oracle Cloud or help our existing customers take on the latest and greatest functionality, like deploying AI agents. Just in my personal life, I've got 2 young kids, and honestly, even though they're young, every day I think about the world that they're growing up in and just what does the future look like and how do we make it a better place? And just constantly thinking about the HR space and how it's evolving, because I've seen that shift from when I started my career to where we are now and where we're going in the future. So really excited to talk to you today.
Perfect. That's going to be perfect segue into really what I wanted to pick your brain about on just your experience on the AI automation, and not only wanting to elaborate on that more, but as you mentioned with your kids, like what are we looking at future wise? Like what are we potentially losing when those entry level roles specifically happen to either shift or completely disappear? Because I think we're starting to see that from our side. So curious on what your thoughts are there.
I'm always thinking back to how I started my career because I feel like it's a really relevant example. I was a benefits assistant at a biomedical university, and it was just the classic entry-level HR, like doing data entry. I was constantly doing mail merges and answering whatever question was thrown at me over the phone. And today, honestly, like most of that was replaced by self-service, but now I'm, helping companies build the AI agents, right? Where they can answer policy questions. So that role has been primed for automation really from the last 10 plus years at this point with self-service and these AI agents that I'm helping build. But, as I thought about it, I was trying to think through what I learned in that role originally. And it was that judgment through constant repetitive tasks, right? And I think a great example was how many times people would fill out a dependent care FSA form for their dependents' medical claims and not for daycare expenses. And it's those types of examples that I learned along the way for that context. And I think about some of our manual processes. In that benefits role, I was constantly manually updating these records, but it taught me how HR data ties to payroll and benefits all fits together. And then just thinking about patience and presence and communication, because I was on the phone with people that this employee and their spouse maybe gave birth, and they were worried about their child being covered under the health plan. So there were things that weren't even on the job description that I'd love to tell you about too, that I think were really formative in my youth. At 21 years old, I was balancing and auditing the medical claims for this world-renowned physicist. He was incapable at the time of keeping track of all of that, and they tasked me with that. So I was interacting one-on-one with somebody that was so renowned in the industry. Or another great example, there was a Nobel Prize winner. He was our president of the university at the time, and I got to teach him how to use self-service one-on-one. So it was that type of experience that taught me that executive presence, how to solve problems, and really helped make who I am today when I'm interacting with a CHRO or a CIO and those types of examples.
Welcome to the Hire Her podcast, where women in talent call all the shots. We know, another recruiting podcast, just what the industry needs. Okay, but hear us out. You ever spend hours sourcing that perfect candidate, but they end up ghosting you harder than your hinge date? Or finally, you get that hiring manager feedback, only for them to, of course, say, "Can we see more candidates?" Lame, right? But let's talk about what's really lame in the industry. How is it that 65% of recruiters are brilliant women, yet most of the decision makers look like a convention for middle-aged dudes named Brad?
That's where we come in. Hire Her isn't just another podcast about hiring trends you already heard like 50 times this week. We're here to elevate women in talent, share their career journeys, and make sure they take the lead. Because let's face it, if recruiting is the backbone of every company, why are we still fighting for a seat at the table? So whether you're a recruiter, a talent leader, or just someone trying to swim through the sausage fest of TA leadership, we got you, girl. Welcome to Hire Her, the recruiting podcast where women's voices aren't just heard, but they're leading the conversation.
So subscribe now, because middle management Brad sure as hell isn't going to do it for you.
Curious. So you mentioned the word like judgment, right? Like you were able to use your judgment. And I'm just curious if you think, and I also feel this way too, that I've heard like, okay, is AI making us lazy? And to me, it's like, is it eliminating like the grind that when we were in our early 20s, coming out of college, even in college, is it eliminating that? And then is it affecting how we would best use our judgment, how we learn that? Like your experiences, I've experienced that too when I started early on, from like the paper to the system. It is really helpful to know that. Or I'm just thinking, the younger generation is like, they're so used to technology. Maybe it's not as a big deal as we think it is, where that's just what we were exposed to, but maybe it's not going to be a big deal. I'm like still torn in with that piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to your question is like yes to both of those, honestly. and I was thinking, I'm constantly thinking of examples from my youth. And I'm going to be honest, I've never told anybody this, I don't think, because it's so embarrassing. But I was like this 20-year-old guy in an office. This was in an internship that I did. And such a great experience for me. But it taught me judgment. And the example is I get handed this 3-ring binder and they're like, can you pull out the forms for like these 3 people or whatever it is? And like, I'm the way I was like this middle school dude, I just pull out the paper. Like, I don't even open up the 3 rings. And it's so embarrassing to think about. And they gave me this look like, what are you doing? I don't remember if they had to even explain it to me, but it was like this super awkward moment. But it was such a learning experience that like, if you don't have those entry-level roles to teach that judgment, like those awkward moments, those safe places to fail, like that's, I think, one of the things that could potentially get lost in these examples if we're not teaching people types of things in their first job, right? Like how to ask for help, how to communicate clearly, how to fail safely, like my example, honestly, in like this low stakes environment. So that's just some of the things I was thinking about.
Yeah, well, also some really great examples. I think we all have those oopsies, right? Like it's just inevitable when you're learning and growing. It's almost like now that remote work is becoming more popular, not that I'm opposed to it because I do like to be at home, but sometimes a hybrid is a really good option and piece too. So what you had mentioned is that had you not been in the office and had not done that and they had not seen you, that might have been a learning experience that you had lost, right? So I know that there's lots of conflicts between going back into the office or not, but I think that's also a prime example of like, there's some benefit to being in the office and being around your employees and your executives and kind of getting to know everyone's demeanor. But yeah, a really good example there. And I also wanted to say, okay, so with that example, from all my HR peeps listening in, like what skills or projects, I guess, in a sense, should like these HR leaders now at our level, how should they present that to their new hires, like the younger generations that are coming in, based on like the traditional, onboarding and admin tasks now that things are going to be automated? Like what kind of skills or projects do you think could be assigned to the population, especially with AI taking over and some of these, new hires coming in and just not having, I would say, some of the judgment that we, have learned over our years?
So I was talking with a coworker who's probably a year or 2 into the workforce only, and I think he's so sharp. And I was trying to think of the things that he was really, really good at that made me say, this is somebody I want within our organization. And, some of those things were critical thinking, problem solving, and, the ability to research. The other thing I think that's so important is just questioning AI-based answers, like see the other side of arguments. I've always said, sometimes AI is a little too agreeable. So I like prompting what's the other side of this argument, because sometimes it feels like it's just reiterating what I'm putting in a lot of ways and sort of being that echo chamber. But I really like the idea of hiring entry level folks, because I think they can actually be better at some of the things. Like they're coming in fresh with like a completely different lens. And I think a great example is sometimes I have people asking me like, where can I add AI into this business process? But like some of the entry level younger folks are just like, why are we doing it this way? That's like really powerful. And that's where like, I feel like, thinking about skills and type of work that we can give some of these younger generation folks is like, let them go through a process. Like ask them where they think it's broken or outdated. Like maybe from like an AI agent testing, like writing prompts, testing them, flagging what's helpful or confusing, right? And I think that can really, help sharpen their clarity, their iteration skills. Other things I'm thinking about too is, just where is the escalation point maybe in some of these automations? Like where should human judgment come in? And then just thinking about like the ability to analyze things. And I know like we could use AI for a lot of those things, but like let them maybe read the pulse surveys that are done, the check-ins, or go out to the company's Glassdoor reviews, right? And search for patterns or things people are saying that leaders might miss too. So I think it's just thinking about the skills like curiosity, pattern recognition, and just trying to constantly improve. And maybe if we just give them like, here's the problem, right? Like try to solve it. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, very true. Because there is that hallucinations that I know people are worried about when it comes to AI. And then I do notice that too sometimes. Sometimes you do have to check AI, guys, like in case, anyone out there doesn't know, you do at times. It's learning just like how we are. And so there are times where I will catch like an error or mistake and I'll say, oh no, but what about this? And they're like, oh, thank you. And then it'll, redo it. So there is some checking. I think at some point, over the next, so on months or years, it'll be sharper. But I think now it's amazing, but there's still, lots of work being done. So those are some really great points. And just, I think going back to like the people aspect and keeping that human part of it, no pun intended, the human role, but like keeping that human aspect in it is still really critical. I tell people that all the time, like we still need our people. And I know that, there's other things happening with robots that we can't prevent, but we're still needed, especially in the HR space. Our judgment is still needed. So, okay, so let's get into the AI automation and like how you said, sometimes you like to test AI to tell you the opposite. What would you say should not be programmed, especially when we're trying to like develop people? What do you think are things that we should probably stay away from when it comes to building like these AI bots?
I'd probably say anything that really tied to trust or growth or nuance. Like I like seeing humans and machines together in those types of things. Like if we're thinking about developing people, performance conversations, like I'm all for prompting and having a starting point or helping write goals as, that first erasing a blank page syndrome. But I don't think we should automate that entirely, right? Like I do think human judgment is so important there. Coaching and mentorship, probably. I was toying around with an idea of if you were a first-time line manager, how can I use AI to help somebody with that? But I think you still need, that learning from observing people. And I go back to like early moments in my career. I learned so much just from shadowing like a few really awesome people. And they would take me along to various meetings. They'd give me a small part that they knew I was comfortable in. And then like sometimes like people just in those situations just tune out the rest because they're like, this isn't my part. But I realized that like I'm given this really valuable opportunity to sit alongside some really great leaders and just watch how they handle things. Like, I don't think you could ever automate that. That's probably like some examples that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, very true. There are some things where I think it's just inevitable. We're still going to be needed. Or what I've at least told my population and my colleagues and network is that, okay, fine, like these bots are going to be here. Now we got these self-driving cars and stuff, but there's still a human that needs to kind of like build that out, right? So instead of you answering the questions, now you're in the system building that out behind the scenes to make sure, AI responds appropriately. And so it's more of a strategic role now versus like being on the front end, handling everything from an employee relations stance. So yeah, so I think lots of your things that you were mentioning is also like right on point with kind of what my mindset is and what I've been like coaching people. So glad to hear I'm not too far off from the expert in the house. But okay, so let's talk about hiring. Do we think that AI will change? We've talked about like the entry level jobs that we really think they'll change. Do we think that that is probably already here, will full force, kind of change that? And then entering like the judgment, the curiosity, adaptability, curious if that will outweigh GPA or like a job history. Because I know when I was starting off, it was like I didn't have the experience, but like I was like high in school, finishing everything, top tier. And sometimes they would still select someone with experience, more experience than me. So it's kind of like, well, how can I even get started? Now I'm not sure if AI will fully eliminate that. So do you think that that will kind of change or stay the same?
I mean, I think we're entering this new era ultimately at the entry level. So I do think that AI is changing what we value. And I was thinking back, like a decent resume isn't enough anymore. Like it's this gatekeeper ultimately, right? But it doesn't show how people think. And that's where I think going back to the skills like prompt literacy, adaptability, collaboration matters so much more than, like memorizing a task or a list, or the list of titles from your experience. So like, I do think that we are going to start shifting more to this credential based, from like that credential base that you were mentioning to more capability. I'm thinking about figuring out like, can these people collaborate with AI? Can you maybe ask better questions? Can you adjust quickly to change? Like that's a really important skill. So I think more and more companies are starting to like look for like real world work samples. And I know that's hard when you maybe haven't had that role before, but to the entry level folks, I think they're looking for like LinkedIn posts, simulations, GitHub repositories, things like that. And while like they may not have that experience, I think using examples from your real world, I think the education system in higher education should start focusing in some of those areas. And I know some universities are going there as well right now, but I think that's going to be a big shift to just show how people can be fast learners, how they think within systems and how they figure things out. So I think maybe more hands-on experience in the education world will be really powerful, and being able to show some of those projects that you did during that time to show how you think and act.
Yeah. So when you said change, like change management is always, especially in the consulting space, right? When you're trying to help companies, it's always an internal battle. But we can't avoid it anymore, right? AI is like lightning years ahead of us. So it is very critical to make sure we're repeatedly staying up to speed with change. But then there is a thing that's called change fatigue, right? And so we don't want to overload it. But I think just having a plan and building out like the baby steps of certain stuff, is always good from there. So okay, so I know you mentioned like just obviously showing skills on front end, which is definitely a plus, people. So please take that advice. Very critical to make sure you're able to do that as well versus just always being, behind a computer. But since you have been in the room, Chris, with, a lot of these AI build outs, if a company is heavy in AI and using that, how do you think like our HR, professionals can ensure that tech is not only being efficient, but can also help develop, their people internally?
Yeah, so this is probably like my HR background soapbox, but like HR's always been about people, right? Like not just filling roles or tracking headcount, but like helping the workforce grow and thrive and bring their best self to work, right? So I think as these organizations adopt AI, like I think we have to be asking all along the way, are we using this to develop people, right? Or are we just using it to like streamline a process? So like obviously like AI can make things faster, but faster isn't always better, right? Like, so I think again, like going back to my new manager example, like a new manager doesn't need more like checklists. They need support. They need confidence. And that's where AI can offer nudges or put out coaching tips or or like flag patterns for burnout, but like we have to help those people in those roles grow. And that's HR's job. Like, I think if we just really focus on like what HR is really about, which in my opinion is people first, right? Then like AI needs to be a tool to sort of amplify that human potential, right? Not replace it. When I think about it, we need AI that sort of supports that journey, right? Something that we can build that's very meaningful, give the workplace room to thrive, and ultimately just put people first. And that then will probably lead to the best work. So
yes,
that's what I'm thinking, man.
Let's celebrate that people first, right? From like the human aspect of things. I have been encouraging companies to and executives to at least be transparent with AI, right? I think we're starting to see that sometimes where there's been lawsuits coming through and people feel like they weren't hired because of something, but it was really something that they had programmed, through their AI platform. So I think that is very critical. If you're launching this internally, just make sure that your people are aware. I know sometimes we don't want to overshare, but I think not sharing at all also makes people not trust, right, the company. And so sharing some, and then if someone's role may be heavily affected or changed completely, maybe do some training or seeing what their goals are and seeing if they'll could potentially fit into another role, right? And help train them on that to kind of help broaden their horizons as well. So I think there's definitely options versus AI just, fully replacing. I always say I had posted an episode maybe about a month or so ago, but no, it's AI is not replacing, right? It's a partner. And so I think if we look at it that way and don't run from it and kind of accept it, and then make sure our people are taken care of, then it can only be positive from there.
Yeah, I agree. I think the last thing I would just mention to you is that like my hope, and I think organizations haven't really caught up, is that these entry level roles ultimately need to like be redefined, right? Like, and if we want strong talent down the road, ultimately, like we need to design these new kinds of experiences for them. And that happens when we're intentional and not by accident. So that would be like my parting words there on like anybody that has that influence, where I think we should be going.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Chris. This was so insightful too. You guys, look, reach out to Chris, connect with him. He'll be attached to this post. He definitely has heavy experience. So if you need any type of additional insight on AI or just want to pick his brain, feel free to connect with him. I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from you all. And Chris, I feel like we need to have like another follow-up episode down the line and just kind of see AI is changing every hour of every day, right? Or every minute almost. So I'm sure there'll be lots of new changes. So would love to have you on again, in the near future to kind of hear what's next and what's coming up so we can be prepared for it.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for the time today.
Okay, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. And I will see you in a few weeks for another episode. Bye.